Hi, my name is Evan Miyazono. I lead long-term research and meta research at Protocol Labs, and I'm here to talk to you about my thoughts on infrastructure for a metaverse. Overall outline will have me starting with some definitions of metaverse because it's not particularly well defined, and then I hope to share some opinions that may get you to agree that when people say that there could be many metaverses, that you see that future as either stupid or very disappointing. And then I'd like to motivate the metaverse as Web 3.1, a smaller modifier to the large innovation and kind of cataclysmic change to the internet that Web 3 itself can bring. In terms of the metaverse, I'll start off with three definitions I pulled from great resources around the internet. I'll start with one that defines it as a real-time 3D social medium where people can create and engage in shared experiences as equal participants in an economy with societal impact. Would highly recommend Tim Sweeney's SIGGRAPH talk about the metaverse. I also enjoy this definition where it highlights the defining characteristic where there's an economic system in the metaverse that enjoys supremacy to fiat systems controlled by nation states. And this really highlights the role of cryptocurrency, the potential role of cryptocurrency. Note that it's potentially possible for a corporation to develop its own in-system currency that dominates a metaverse, like via this definition. And Outlier Ventures, the Open Metaverse OS, is a great document that explains some connections between open source, Web3, and the metaverse. And then a third definition that I'd like to include is that the metaverse is defined by analogy almost. It's a quasi-successor to the mobile internet, and in the same way that we had the desktop internet change into the mobile internet, we will see a similar magnitude of change that is hard to extrapolate. And this comes from Matthew Ball's A Framework for the Metaverse, as part of a 9-part series that go into great depth about what it takes to build a metaverse and what that might look like. Would highly recommend all of them. And if we're going to talk about what these kind of stages of the internet and what it was and what it might become, it's great to look a little bit deeper into what it was. We have the origins of the internet as a network that was intended to be robust and distributed and be able to survive partial failure, to the ARPANET, to eventually the web and HTTP, which slowly turned into Web 2.0 and the application-based website internet that we know today, where Web 2 led to a significant degree of centralization because it was so much easier to coordinate and interact with content when you had these client-server models and all of the information was aggregated in these smaller numbers of servers rather than being hosted locally. And the exciting thing about Web 3 is that we have a distributed, trustless, democratized, empowered set of individuals who can provide their own services, who can custody their own data and do so efficiently and verifiably. And many of these apps from Web 2 are converging onto a metaverse as something that we should try to build. Many new Web 3 protocols and programs are being built for a more decentralized potential metaverse. But I want to convey that the biggest virtual world that satisfies the criteria should not be considered a metaverse. In the same way that the internet isn't the world's most popular website, the metaverse won't be the most popular 3D world. The thing that defines the internet and what will define the metaverse is that it's these components that tie all of those worlds together and make them work cohesively. The internet has evolved a thin waist hourglass-shaped architecture, or like thin waist protocol stack, where you have interoperability because if you are running, or if you're connected to the internet, you are running some version of the internet work protocol. And This paper highlights some interesting simulations that might lead you to believe that for a reasonable set of assumptions, you will end up with a narrow waist. But I don't think that this is necessarily guaranteed, and it's also not guaranteed that that thin waist will be an open protocol that is permissionless. If you go through and want to dig into the history of how we ended up with IPv4, I would definitely recommend the book Designing Internet. It goes through some of the history as well as an NSF program to redesign IP, which shows, one, a bunch of very interesting directions that it could have gone, some of which include some of the more content-addressed networking that Web3 is starting to build on. And others, this book additionally shows that it's quite difficult to change a thin waist protocol once it's been established, even if the proposed improvements provide radically different or additional features. And so on the topic of potentially changing protocols, it's worth noting that there are many people and many groups who either are trying to define what the metaverse should be for everyone, and there are also many people who believe that a metaverse is intrinsically dystopian because they can look into their predictions of the future and see all of the horrible things or disappointing things that it could be. But I think what brings a lot of the Filecoin community together is that we tend to look at the future and see not what's likely, but we can see what we want the future to look like, and we know how to start charting a path toward that point. And so rather than get bogged down by FUD, I think it's worth acknowledging that it's easier to accelerate the technologies that we want than to slow or stop the technologies that we don't want sometimes. And so to that extent, it's worth going through and thinking about what we actually need to build. And the two of the reports that I mentioned have great breakdowns of the kinds of things that you would want to have as part of your metaverse, the kinds of tooling or infrastructure that you need to develop. And the thing that I think that this is potentially missing is the fact that there's a great insight in this Union Square Ventures blog post that you don't really see infrastructure being built and then applications that build on top of that. You see applications that innovate and identify what the new infrastructure should be, and then infrastructure standardizes some of those features as a result of the applications demonstrating high value. And the blog post goes through and shows this trend in many different spaces. Oddly enough, the current posting of the blog post does not include these images, so if you don't get that, try the Wayback Machine. And thinking about this in combination with the metaverse, I realized that some of the most valuable and impactful pieces of Web 2 technology are things like Gather.town or Figma or the Google Docs, Google Drive suite. All of these tools have fantastic capabilities that we could generalize, or we could steal out of Web 2, generalize, and turn into Web 3 infrastructure. And I think that this infrastructure is critically important to metaverse interoperability. These capabilities are things like a robust sense of identity, incredibly powerful interoperability for collaboration synchronously. There's some sense of spatial relationships between people and objects, and there's some sense of what it means to move assets around in these. And the extent to which it is hard to identify what copying and pasting something into or from Gather.town is highlights kind of the design problem that we need to be able to solve to move things between metaverses. But I think that when we think about the Ready Player One style world where people are taking their items and jumping through portals, the foundation for that is figuring out what it means to copy and paste from Google Docs into Gather.town, and then doing it in a Web3 compatible way. So I hope that hearing that, when you see these images of metaverse, like AR metaverse type things, you start to get a clear sense of what it would take in terms of the back end to track and manage and provide this interactive information, and how it's really just a three-dimensional, but also hopefully a decentralized version of the two-dimensional examples that I just showed. I claim that Web3 will be able to do all these things natively. I think that these technological capabilities are so useful that it's almost an inevitability that someone will build them, and I would challenge you to be a part of that. And I would invite you to imagine a world where this kind of collaboration in a spatial-like environment is fairly trivial. And the question of where do these decentralized Web3-like protocols fit in becomes, I think, fairly intuitive when you start thinking about just replacing the Web 2 style backend with a more Web 3 style backend. And you'll have assets being communicated between participants using libp2p, stored on IPFS, in IPLD formats, backed up to Filecoin, and you'll track these things on some smart contract chain like Ethereum. And other than that, I would like to leave you with some of the highlights from the talk. Point out that you're more than welcome to come join and build these things. Protocol Labs wants to help you build these capabilities. Come join the Filecoin Slack and find out more. And if you have questions about my talk specifically, feel free to hit me up on Twitter.